Thank you for being here today. I want to visit a bit about that balance between taxes and spending in the medium term. If Congress just increases taxes to eliminate the deficit in 10 years, let's say, without cutting spending, could that have an effect on our economic recovery, a negative effect?
So as I was trying to make the distinction earlier that in an economy in recession, tax cuts or tax increases have two effects. One is the incentive effects, which are more long-term effects, but also withdrawing purchasing power, taking away income from consumers. And in a short-term recessionary situation, I think that latter effect is more important. So if you raise taxes during a recession, you probably want to offset it with a tax cut elsewhere, for example. Over a longer period of time, you have to weigh the implications of higher taxes on incentives and on potential growth against the benefits of what you're using the revenue for. Mm-hmm. So there is a cost-benefit trade-off to be made there. And so in particular, I think, and I believe that Congress will want to look at both sides, both the tax and the spending side, and try to find a reasonable balance between those two.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned just a few minutes ago that many of the programs at the Fed are temporary and could be wound down. Well, such is the case with the Congress also, and this stimulus bill comes to mind. If Congress were to freeze spending at 2009 fiscal year levels and freeze release of the TARP funds at the end of the fiscal year, this fiscal year, do you believe the economy will have recovered adequately that we could then begin to address the debt and deficit problem and focus on it? Because you mentioned that as a very important looming issue. So I'm looking at the point at which we can actually, as a Congress, also enact an exit strategy from trying to stimulate economic growth because the economy is finally leveling out, and then begin to address that great looming issue that you mentioned as a concern that I agree is a huge concern, that being both the deficit and the debt.
I think it's very important, as I mentioned in my testimony, to begin the planning process as soon as possible so that we'll have a persuasive exit strategy that will not only give us a plan, but will also help to reassure lenders and the bond markets that, in fact, the U.S. government is going to find a fiscally sustainable path going forward. You asked about 2009. No one knows the future, of course, but based on our own best projections, we think that the economy will still be pretty weak, albeit starting to grow at the end of 2009, and the unemployment rate will probably still be rising. So it will not be a period of, it's unlikely to be a period of robust growth at that point.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, suppose if we froze spending of the federal government's budgets at 2009 level, and then let the stimulus package continue to work. Would that be a way to begin to address the deficit and the debt, as well as allow the stimulus monies to continue to flow into the economy?
Congresswoman, I think there are lots of ways that you could structure this, and I don't think I want to try to pick one, particularly on the fly here. Mm-hmm. So you really need to think about maybe not just the total amount of spending, but the various programs and the various needs we have, from health and defense and benefits payments, everything else, and think about those programs and try to think about how we're going to structure them in a way that we'll get, over the next few years, we're going to get a return to a more balanced situation. So I think a longer-term perspective is probably necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.